Yeah, okay, hello everybody, Shalom Aleichem. Poo. My first reaction is a lot of people, and that's good. God bless you all. I'm happy to be here. I got to say l'chaim Rabbi Konnikov. L'chaim everybody, I'm drinking coffee in the meantime. I spoke to the rabbi last night. I spoke to Rabbi Konnikov last night. And we talked about what I should talk about. And I said to Rabbi Konnikov, what would happen if I would share with you what this day means to me? You know, Chabad is very big. Chabad is very pluralistic. Chabad is very open. So many people are involved in Chabad on so many levels. There's so many different degrees. And everybody knows that the heart of Lubavitch is the Rebbe. Everybody understands that the pulse, the beat, the energy, the direction, the motivation, the vision, the wisdom, the principle comes from one person, comes from the Rebbe. But especially for people who are a little younger, who've never met the Rebbe, often people don't appreciate not the personality of the Rebbe, but the person. What I mean to say is this. The Rebbe is a great man. You know, he's a very great man, incredibly great man. The truth is beyond our fathoming. I'm biased. I tell my students all the time, born, bred, and brainwashed. I was born in Chabad. This is all I know, and I'm prepared to admit that I'm not objective, and I'm happy about it. I teach girls in seminary, so they have to make every year a sweatshirt to mark their year. They put all the names in the back. So on the sleeve they wrote, "Born, bred, and brainwashed day." I'm born, bred, and brainwashed. A lot of us are. What I think people don't know enough is the degree to which our relationship with the Rebbe was individual and personal. And I think it's very important, I mean, especially today. We're marking the Rebbe's yahrzeit. It's an important day. I mean, my children, none of them knew the Rebbe. They're all born after. And they struggle to understand the place of the Rebbe in their life. They struggle to develop a relationship with the Rebbe. One of my sons spent the entire day asking himself, should I be happy or sad? You know, how are you supposed to look at a day like today? He never met the Rebbe. He's named after him. His birthday is actually today. He was born on the Rebbe's yahrzeit. I'm supposed to know how many years ago. I think 22. I'm embarrassed to admit. And his name is Mendel. And he vacillates between being very upset, very disappointed, never met the Rebbe, didn't know the Rebbe. He's a chassid, he's a good kid. And being told that that's not the right reaction, it's not the right response. So before I talked about happy and sad, we'll get to that a little later. I just want to spend a few minutes. I'm not going to give a long talk because we have to interrupt. And I got permission from the rabbi to sing. That's the one thing I remember from my notes, is that in this Chabad house we can actually sing. I feel one of the greatest gifts of Lubavitch that's underappreciated is our singing, our Negina. Rabbi Meir, right? Meir sings. So many Chabad houses, the people don't get to taste Chabad Negunim, not Hava Nagila, which is also wonderful, and Am Yisrael Chai. But we got good Negunim. They take a little while to learn. But once you learn them, they're the language of the soul. They come from the soul. They go to the soul. But I want to begin the Fabringen just with this, and maybe I'll see how it goes. If it goes well, I'll talk about it some more. My father and Rabbi Konnikov's father grew up in a Lubavitch which could fit in this room. When my father was yeshiva, there were far fewer boys in the whole yeshiva than there are people sitting at this table. My father and his father friends from school. But how many boys were there? How many bacha there were in the whole Lubavitch? 40? And they were divided up among 3 different yeshivas? 50? It's tiny. It was after the war. Everybody had a story, and few of them were happy. My father's an orphan. My father doesn't even remember his mother. My father does not remember his own mother. His mother passed away in 1941. It was the beginning of the Second World War in Russia. He was 2.5. But that was normal, you know. If your life was miserable, you were a regular guy, you know. If life was good, there was something wrong with you. I think today we feel the same way. We're trying to look for reasons to be miserable because God forbid we're not miserable. Then it's a rachmanas on us. There's nothing wrong with me. Vey is mir. I got to find the problems to have a way to live. That's a new American disease that the Jews are very good at. But that generation didn't have to look for trouble. The trouble found them. They came to this country. My father came to this country at the age of 15. He had a father, Baruch Hashem. His father had remarried. But the role that Rebbe played in their lives, the measure of involvement of the Rebbe in their lives, it's beyond the father. It was so intimate. He paid so much attention to every person. One of the gifts that the Rebbe had is an incredible memory and an ability to hold on to information. If you told the Rebbe something once, you never had to repeat it, ever. And he met 1,000 people. He remember what you said. It's remarkable. He knew these kids who he was rearing in his yeshiva, who would later become his emissaries. They'd become the first generation of Chabad shluchim. And he literally fathered them. He was involved in their lives very, very intimately, very personally. And he paid attention. And he directed and he advised. And if you needed to focus on one particular trait that the Rebbe imparted to all of these, to that entire generation, he did not let them for a moment to be defeatist, to be victims. And they were victims. He insisted on giving them a point of view of not only a positive future, but a positive present and a positive sense of life. And he raised them. He took a bunch of broken people and made them great. It's, you know, when you make broken people great, the greatness is also broken. There's a lot of trauma, but still, the alternative would have been much worse. My father's sister, who, Mayor, right? Rebbe from Worcester is Miriam Neville, right? You remember from Worcester? Remember from Worcester? My father's sister told me she was also a Russian immigrant, came to this country, an incredible person, brilliant and beautiful and broken. Really, I think it's quite accurate. Brilliant and beautiful and broken. She said the Rebbe stopped her in the street and just chatted with her. And he had this kind of relationship with all the kids in Lubavitch. And he literally took them to their chuppahs, whether he physically carried them or he directed them. And he directed their lives towards meaning and towards positivity, towards trust, towards hope, towards a belief in a positive future. And they're our grandparents. They're my parents. They're his grandparents. They're the founding community of the Lubavitch in America, which is really the basis for the thousands and thousands of emissaries that Chabad now has. My generation, Rabbi Kanekov's generation, the Rebbe was a big, intimidating Rebbe who was far more distant. I was in a yechidus. I was in a private audience with the Rebbe with my family at the age of 9.5. That was the last time I was in the Rebbe's private presence until after Gimmel Tammuz. I remember the event vaguely. I was not a particularly sharp 9.5-year-old. If I understood the significance of the meeting, I probably would have paid better attention. And there's a lot of confusion, you know. Fact and fancy tend to weave together over the course of time. So I'm not even sure what I remember. I'm not sure what actually happened, but I remember being in the Rebbe's room. But that was the last time. My bar mitzvah was the year of the Rebbe's heart attack. I didn't have an opportunity. My younger brother went into the Rebbe for his bar mitzvah. I missed that opportunity because the Rebbe was not well. He wasn't seeing people. So my relationship with the Rebbe is not personal what my father's was. Rabbi Konakov, Mrs. Konakov's relationship with the Rebbe is more remote. But the truth of the matter was that anybody who was around the Rebbe, if you were for any period of time, and you paid attention, understood that he sees everyone as an individual. The Rebbe could sit in a room. Have you ever watched films of those fabrengs? They put them on, I'm sure you put them on the gym. You see a fabreng, and the Rebbe sitting at the table all by himself. Nobody sits next to him, which is quite unusual. And there's thousands of men in a room, and there's women behind the screen. And the Rebbe talks. When the Rebbe talks, he looks at a column. He doesn't look at anybody. He looks at a beam. Because whoever he would look at would have to close his eyes, you see. The Rebbe's eyes were fire. They looked through you. But between the talks, he'd look around the room, he'd look at you, it looks very casual. It doesn't seem like it's much. He's saying, hello, how are you? Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. It's good to see you again. How you doing? Very, almost politically correct. What you don't understand is, you can't understand it unless you experienced it. If the Rebbe looked at you, and he did this, there was absolutely no doubt in your mind that he looked at you. Because if you were not sure if he looked at you, you were sure he wasn't looking at you. Because the Rebbe's eyes, even though he was elderly and he didn't see that well, would look through you. My experience, I tell this to people all the time, the Rebbe raised me with his eyes. I had few conversations, and they were one-liners. He talked and I kept my mouth shut. He would look at you for a fraction of a second. Your eyes would touch his and his eyes touch yours. And there was a conversation that was very meaningful. It was about growth, it was about real things. One of the things about the Rebbe was you could never, ever schmaltz him up. There was no way you could get him to be interested in anything other than what's really important. And his eyes said that to me, to you, to him, to her. And he talked to us. As big as Lubavitch was, and as many as there were in a room, when you walked by him and you received $1, or the Fabrengens, he'd look at you during a Fabreng, just take a look in your direction. And you were very careful. I mean, I was always raised, when you look, in general, when you meet people, you look into their eyes. But with the Rebbe, you wanted to make eye contact. And it was very quick. But that moment was magical. That moment was real. In my experience, the Rebbe knew me well. He knew me personally. And he cared about me and he understood me. And he knew not only the good stuff. The Rebbe would look at me sometimes and I could feel pride. The Rebbe could look at me at other times and he could feel sad. And I knew it. And the Rebbe could look at me sometimes and say, would you move? And all there was eyes. But there was an enormous amount of communication. What I'm trying to communicate to you, what I want to share with you, is that even the generation that we belong to, when Lubavitch was so big, our relationship with the Rebbe was really, really deeply personal. And I think you have to understand this. What is the secret of Chabad? Chabad is an unusual movement. It's historic. You cannot find a movement like this, I think, in all of Jewish history. We have thousands of young men and women who are quite modern, who dedicate their entire lives to other people at great personal expense. Why do they do it? Why? And the real answer to the question is because of a personal bond. This is not a club. This is not fandom. This is not, we belong to the winning team. There is a personal relationship between every young man and young woman who goes out and does this work and the Rebbe. From my generation, from the generation before. And the thing that's so remarkable, it's true of my children's generation. I have 3 married children. They're all, thank God, close enough for us to drive to. You understand? I have a nephew who's in Ghana, Africa, and a niece that's in Cambodia. You understand? My children live in Pennsylvania and Connecticut and New York. So we're okay so far. Those children were born after they never saw the Rebbe. I have a son who has a photo with himself and the Rebbe. The Rebbe was after the stroke. He was about 6 months old. My wife walked by, and he cherishes this photo like the whole world depends on it. He's a little tiny baby. He has no recollection. Somehow, this truth, this phenomena, that this gigantic Rebbe, what made him so great was the fact that he really, really never spoke to a group of people. He spoke to individuals. And when he was talking to thousands, he was talking to each one separately. And he had this ability to really care really care about everybody he interfaced with, everybody he met. And those of us who are, BBB, born, bred, brainwashed, this is the secret. It works because there's something very real about our relationship with the Rebbe. And I find it remarkable, but it works because of my children. My children have a real relationship with the Rebbe, a personal relationship. It's very, very individual. So this day is really important to us, to Chabad, to Lubavitcher Hasidim. In any way, I'm not excluding you. I'm just saying, I want you to understand how we feel about this. This is our relationship with the Rebbe is not a big rabbi on a mountaintop, even though he was a big rabbi on a very big mountain. It's very personal. It's very individual, because this is what makes a Rebbe a Rebbe. It's a special kind of human being who has the ability to see big picture and never overlook any detail. And every detail is a person. And so this day, for us, when I think about today, and it's 30 years is a very long time. It's a very long time. It's more than half my life. For my children, it's all their lives. Not to see the Rebbe, not to have that direct inspiration. Lubavitch works, Chabad works, because these personal relationships continue. Now I got to stop talking. I told Rabbi Kanaka I'm just going to speak for a minute. So I want to just say that. I want to give you a challenge. I don't know how you feel about this, or if you have any feelings about this. But I tell this to people wherever I go. I challenge each of you to figure out a way of developing a personal relationship with the Rebbe. To have a personal relationship with the Rebbe, you have to understand him. You have to study what he teaches. Unfortunately, you have to visit the grave. But many people who have never physically met him, like a fellow who used to be a rabbi, a conservative rabbi, I think, he's become a Chabadnik. And the name of his book is I Haven't Met the Rebbe 500 Times, meaning Nisanov. I haven't met the Rebbe 500 times. What he's trying to say is, I never physically saw the Rebbe, and I meet all of these people who've seen the Rebbe, and they all remind me they haven't seen the Rebbe in some kind of weird way, some kind of odd way. It adds up to a meeting. It adds up to a relationship. It's important for me to share with you that this is what Hasidim always were. The Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, founded the Hasidic movement almost 3 centuries ago. This year, Hasidus is 290 years old officially. And the Hasidic movement is, to the greatest extent, the relationship with very holy people and very ordinary people. At the heart of the Hasidic movement is the tzaddik. And there's the story of this tzaddik and the story of this tzaddik, and I'm sure you've seen it and you've read it, you've heard it and you've absorbed it. These tzaddikim had personal relationships with us. And we have personal relationships with them. And it is a goal to feel like the Rebbe is yours. It's a goal, it's not easy. But people have that experience who, I've never met him 500 times, Because that's what it is. It's not just Rebbe's a smart guy, he's got good ideas. He's a person, a gigantic person, but a person who so deeply cares about us that a lot of us feel that care. And it defines our lives. It defines our lives. So this is how I want to start this ring by saying, L'chaim, I'm a whatever I am, a big chassid, a little chassid, I'm a chassid. BBB, born, bred, bred one. So I want to give all of us a bracha that the Rebbe should be something that is personal to us and not just this great leader who has a cosmic influence on the whole world. L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim Tevim L'shalom. L'chaim L'chaim. And we have 3 married and 2 engaged.
Very nice.
We're like walking on water. It's been a long journey. I'll tell you a maisa, I'll tell you a story. I heard the story from the person who told the story. It's a very interesting story. The truth of the matter is that stories like these you have in the dozens, in the hundreds. It's a window into the thinking of the Rebbe. The story happened probably in 1983. Either 83 or 84. In other words, it's 40 years ago. For those that could remember that far back, it was the end of the Soviet Union. There was the tail end of the Soviet Union. We know today, from documents, I've read about this, that as the Soviet Union was falling apart, there was a profound increase in paranoia amongst the higher-ups in the government. And part of the reason was that we had people in place to keep the paranoia in check who retired around 1980 or something like that. There was a very, very great fear of the West. And of course, the worst president to have when the Russians are paranoid was Ronald Reagan, Mr. Cowboy. So it was compounded. And I remember this as a kid. In 1980, I was 14. Every time that I ever spoke, for 5 years, until 85, he would say, the world is shaking, the world is shaking. No one knew what he was talking about. And then suddenly, as soon as Gorbachev came to power, didn't say it again. It's very interesting. How did he know? He knew. So here's the story. It was either 83 or 84, it was after Pesach, right after Passover. And of course, one of the big days in Chabad that the Rebbe has really cultivated is Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, as I'm sure you know, is the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar. And our custom is that if it ever occurs on a Sunday, we make a parade, right? You do that here? In Fort Lee, you make a parade. So 83 was a Sunday and 84 was a Sunday. That's why I'm not sure which year it was. As soon as Pesach was over, the Rebbe came to 770, came to his office, with a great urgency that they need to make parades all over the world. Wherever there are Jews, wherever there's Jewish children, they should get the children together and make a parade. Now, you see, the parades were a big demonstration with lots of entertainment and clowns and music and floats and, as they say in Brooklyn, blah, 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 you see. The Rebbe wasn't really interested in all of that. The Rebbe was interested in the children. But if it took clowns and brides and whatever else, magic shows to gather the children, so that's what we had. He was interested in the children. He wanted to see the children. You have to watch the videos of the Rebbe looking at the children by the parade. It's just so special. Have you ever watched it? Little kids marching by, and they was blowing them kisses, and he's looking, and he loves them so much, and he pays attention. He pays attention to every individual. But the parades was a big part of Chabad. And I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you something about the parades. I'll sort of go off on an aside. Our Rebbe arrived in New York in 1941, a year after his father-in-law came. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose name I carry, Yosef Yitzchak, Joseph Isaac, arrived in New York in probably March of 1940. Our Rebbe came probably the end of June of 1941. As soon as he came, his father-in-law put him to work. He made him the president of the organization of the Chabad Outreach Branch, which is now 5,000 Chabad houses. But then it was an office and some chairs and a desk. And the Rebbe laid the groundwork for the work of Chabad. The Rebbe was Russian-born. By the time he gave me, he was about 40 years old. But he had an incredible knack at understanding the American culture. When the Rebbe came to this country, he didn't create a Russian version of Judaism. He created an American version. And he spent a lot of time studying the American street, the American teenager, the American child. He wanted to understand what motivates them, what makes them tick. And he was going to make Yiddishkeit cool. There was an artist, a boy, who learned in the Chabad Yeshiva. I'm not going to remember his name, I'm not even going to try. But he used to make these comics for Chabad circulars in the 40s. And the Rebbe says to him in Yiddish, I cover his first name, I forgot his name, Mach wie Dick Tracy, Mach wie Dick Tracy. The Rebbe got hold of the New York Times. And in those days, it wasn't like today. All there was the newspaper. And you had pages and pages of strips of cartoons. And the Rebbe figured out that the coolest cartoon was Dick Tracy. So he says to this kid who was making caricatures for some Chabad, make him look like Dick Tracy. He wanted the kids to like what it looked like. He was very, very aware of the American mindset and the American culture. And he wanted to create a Judaism that would talk to the American young person. And one of the biggest things that the Rebbe was involved with, one of the biggest things that the Rebbe initiated as he first came here, was the idea of the demonstration. Everybody makes a parade and shows off whoever they are. I could be the biggest idiot. We're having the biggest idiot parade. I am the biggest idiot. And the next sign reads, no, I'm a bigger idiot than you. And we march, and don't tell me I can't march. I'm proud of who I am. Eat your heart out. The Rebbe figured that out pretty quick. So the Rebbe said, we're going to make Jewish parades. He took Jewish boys and girls, teenagers, or not even kids, and they'd march on Eastern Parkway or march on Kingston Avenue, and they'd carry placards that read, keep the Shabbos, give your child a Jewish education. And then the children would come to the back of the shul, 770, and the Rebbe would talk to them, and they'd give them all kinds of food, and they'd eat, they'd make brachas. The Rebbe did this as soon as he got it. By 1942, 43, Lubavitch was already in the business of making parades. So here's a story about the parades. I heard this from an acquaintance of mine, not a friend, but an acquaintance. I met a fellow, he told me the story. The story happened 30 years ago. When I was still a boy, a yeshiva bacher, before I was married. I got married in 1989. So a friend of mine was learning in the yeshiva in Montreal. And as Chabad boys tend to do, on Fridays, when there's no yeshiva, you go find Jewish people and you put tefillin on them. And this fellow, it was downtown in Montreal. I mean, I don't know much about Montreal. And he was finding these very important buildings with the very important people. And he wanted to find the very important Yidden and put film, the lawyers, the machers, you know. Anyway, he got his way into a building that housed a bunch of lawyers. Don't ask me how. If you need the trick, you can speak to the Chabad Cher, they'll teach you all the tricks. He was in the building going from office to office. And he walks into an office. He sees an elderly Jew who was then probably in his late 60s. And he asks him if he's Jewish. He says, yeah. Would you like to put on film? And his answer was, who let you into the building? That's the typical Chabad. That's who let you into the building? He says, well, you're going to leave. And I'm not putting on the film, but before you go, I need to tell you something. Before I kick you out, I have something to tell you. And he tells him the following. I grew up in Montreal in the 1930s. When I was growing up, you didn't want your neighbor to know you were a Jew. Not that you were practicing Jew. You didn't want your neighbor to know that you were a Jew. If you wore a kippah, you always wore a cap. If you wore tzitzit, you put them in your pants. And you made your identity a secret. And it wasn't so much actual fear as much as it was imagined fear. Jews hid. It was the way they were. And in the early 1940s, 9 boys from the Polish yeshiva, Lubavitch yeshiva, managed to get out of Europe. And they went the long way. They went through Russia, and then they went to Japan. They arrived in San Francisco. They ended up in Montreal, 1942. 9 chevre who would lose everything. Their fathers, their mothers, their brothers, and their sisters. They would survive. They were all by their lonesome. Opened up a yeshiva in Montreal. And as soon as they opened the yeshiva, they began to do what Chabadniks do. They made gatherings on Shabbos for the children. They did what's called the Wednesday hour. The kids would go to public school of 1 hour a week where the government would allow them to go out to do religious instruction. And they made parades. So this man, this 67-year-old lawyer, says to my friend, who was about to kick out of the office, he says, I marched in those parades. I was a child. I marched in those parades. And he said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe made Jewish people proud. After those parades, I never hid my Jewishness. A parade is a demonstration of being a Jew. I'm announcing to the world I'm a Jew. And I think we could all agree that part of the American culture, when you show who you are, people respect you and even like you. You hide, they get very nervous. A Jew, and now I'm Jewish, and this is what we do. This is how we do it. And it's a very big part of Lubavitch, is the parade, the public Hanukkah menorah lighting, all the things that we do in a very public way. They're meant to make Jewish people proud. And they're meant to allow the Jewish people to show the world who and what we are. It's foundational to being an American, and therefore it's foundational to being an American Jew. And Chabad is an American Jewish movement. It really is. So here's the story. It's 1983, either 83 or 84. And the Rebbe comes to 770 in the morning and says, we have to make sure that there's a parade wherever there's Jewish children. Now the Rebbe was always in a rush. There was always something urgent that had to get done now. But how urgent was it and how now was it? But the Rebbe came every day, and it was very clear that the Rebbe was concerned about something, and he felt that this parade would offset who knows what. So the people around the Rebbe, who worked for the Rebbe, it was very hard to work for the Rebbe because you never really knew what his motivation was, because you were not a holy man, you couldn't see what he saw. But you listened, you followed. They took the Rebbe very seriously. They got a bunch of chevre, they put him on phone, and started calling all over the world, you got to make parades. As it got closer to the day of Lag BaOmer, the Rebbe began to single out Morocco, North Africa. That there were Chabadniks, there was a yeshiva in North Africa at that time. There were 10 yeshiva students, exchange students studying in Morocco, and the Rebbe said they were living in Casablanca. It's very important that Morocco has the parade, and a lot of Jewish children should march, and they should say psukim. That's all the Rebbe cared about. The psukim, the tzedakah, the holy words, the unity, like I said, the balloons and the clowns were not the Rebbe's cup of tea. It was Jewish children. And every day he comes to shul, comes to work, with a greater urgency than the day before. A few days before Lag BaOmer, there's a very strange instruction. The Rebbe says to one of his secretaries to call Morocco, call the yeshiva, and to tell the boys that they should go to the American embassy, either American embassy or embassy consulate that was in Casablanca, to inform them that they're there. To let the American ambassador or counselor know that there are 10 American students in Casablanca. What's the reason? In case we have to leave at a moment's notice. It's better than fiction. So the person who went to the consulate told me the story. He lives in Australia, his name is Danny Kay. He told me the story. So he took the passports of all of his friends, and he went down to the embassy, and he met the ambassador, and he says, we're American exchange students, we're living here in Morocco, and I just want you to know we're here. Why? You have any plans to leave? No. So what do we have to know? In case we have to leave at a moment's notice. And the ambassador's face turns ashen, gray. He knew something, and the yeshiva student had no idea. Something was going on. There was something about Russia that was very, very, very sensitive. Whether the Rebbe knew it through official channels, or the Rebbe knew it because he was sensitive to it. And he knew that you have to worry about North Africa. So this ambassador says you have to know that person, Danny Kay, he's a hot rod. He's a ball of energy. And he's the greatest representative of the Rebbe. You ask to talk about the Rebbe, he won't shut up for a second. And he says to this boy, why would you think that you'd have to leave at a moment's notice? But his face gave it away. You understand? His countenance said that he understood what the Rebbe meant when the Rebbe said you have to leave at a moment's notice. So he says to this Danny Kay, why would you think you have to leave at a moment's notice? So Danny Kay says, I have no idea. I have no idea. He says, I have no idea, what are you doing here? He says, well, there's a Rebbe who lives in New York, and he gives him the Rebbe speech, the Rebbe 101, 10 minutes of how holy the Rebbe is, and how great the Rebbe is, and how far the Rebbe could see, the whole thing. And the Rebbe said that we have to let you know we're here in case you have to leave at a moment's notice. That's how the speech ended. So he was very, very impressed. So he says to this Danny Kay, he says, I want to ask you a question. Clearly you don't know what's going on. But your rabbi somehow has some kind of, he knows things that most people don't know. Does he have a solution? Does he have a solution? Does he have a way of fixing whatever it is that you don't know what you're talking about? He says, yeah. The solution is, you listening? Get Jewish children together to pray. Get Jewish children together to say Shema Yisrael. Get Jewish children together in a room or on the street, and they should sing songs, they should pray. And the ambassador was so disappointed. Here's this rabbi who lives 10,000 miles away, and he knows what's going on in the world, and what's the solution? Little children should say Shema Yisrael, you see? That's going to solve the world's problems? But apparently it did. Because what happened? Nothing happened. You know the story of Purim? You know the story of Purim? Mordechai was a great rabbi, but he was also a very well-connected politician. Mordechai was amongst the men who sat at the king's gate. He was very well connected. He knew all the important people. And of all the important people that he knew, Esther was his niece. He raised her. And Haman comes along and he wants to destroy the Jewish world. What does Mordechai do? Before he tries to solve the problem politically, he gathers the children together and he prays. This is the Rebbe, a very holy man, a very, very wise man, who understands that the solution to world problems is Jewish children saying a prayer. How does it make sense? How does it make sense? How does that solve the world's problems? It makes sense because Jewish children praying is really powerful. Jewish people or anybody doing righteousness heals the world. The Rebbe's solution to every problem was religion. People were sick, he said, fix your mezuzah. People had a problem finding a job, check your tefillin. People, all kinds of issues were resolved by the Rebbe through spiritual means. Because from his point of view, he sees the corollary between the two worlds. Our religious life, our spiritual life, and our material life, our physical life, our financial health, our physical health, our psychological health, our familial health, are inexorably linked to our religion, to our practice. And the Rebbe feels that the power of children is optimum, is above all else. And the Rebbe actually believes when there's a problem, and see, the thing about the Rebbe is he sees the problem before anybody else can. He can preempt because he's holy and he sees what we don't see. You get children together and pray. I'll tell you a story to me. A little story. The Yom Kippur War is 50 years ago. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this year, I was so excited to celebrate the 50th year since the Yom Kippur War, and boy, was that dream shattered. I was really so excited about celebrating the 50 years since the Yom Kippur War. When the Yom Kippur War broke out, I had just turned 8, okay? My birthday is in September. The summer before, I was 7. I was a little kid with a big mouth and a bad attitude, and a brother to beat up on. And all summer long, I was 7.5 years old. My brother was 6.5. All summer long, we were fed a regular diet by the Rebbe, through our teachers, through our parents, through our camp activities, that the solution to all the problems in the world is the prayer of little children. And the Rebbe was saying over and over and over again, Hevel she'ein bechet, from the mouth of babes. It's actually a Talmudic passage. Little children have special powers of prayer because children have no sin. All summer long, the Rebbe kept on saying that children are, and I remember thinking to myself, I just beat up my brother, we didn't have no sin. I was disrespectful to my mother. I made my mother cry. I have no sin, I'm the biggest sinner in the world. Well, I've grown up since and I've discovered, I wasn't such a good kid, but children have no sin. Children move along. They don't carry anything with them. Long conversation, a big piece of philosophy, it's immaterial. But all summer, the Rebbe talked about children. And when the war started, the Rebbe himself said, I did not know why I was so obsessed with the children. And evidently, I was being pushed to speak this way. The story that happened personally that I remember was, the Rebbe asked one Shabbos to see all the kids. He wanted to see all the children. My father ran home and picked us up. I was 7.5, my brother was 6.5. We lived at the other end of town. He schlepped us to 770, and we took turns walking by the Rebbe. And the Rebbe poured wine from his cup into each one of our little cups. And we got to say l'chaim to the Rebbe. The reason it's so memorable, my younger brother remembers it as well, was that our grandfather, my father's father, he died in 1976, was sitting directly behind the Rebbe. And when we walked up to the Rebbe, he got out of his seat, and he went over to the Rebbe, and he introduced us. He told the Rebbe who we were. He said, this is my son Abba's children, and that's why we remember this. So this is the Rebbe for you. The solution to every material problem is spirituality. You see, you have to be deeply, deeply religious to believe that. You have to be you have to be so deeply connected to God to truly appreciate how a mitzvah, a good deed, offsets who knows what. And that's a Rebbe. A Rebbe, in addition to all the other skills that he has, the great mind, the great heart, the great skill at management, is a very holy person. And the Rebbe saw the solution to everything, a mitzvah. Whenever the Rebbe saw a problem coming, he made another campaign, another mitzvah, do something more. I'll tell you one more story, then I'll stop.